which I think focused even more attention given the media presence in New York and the resources in New York and how it really affected major institutions, banking institutions and others with the power outages that surprised people how non-resilient we really were, even in a city that actually for some time has been planning both in terms of sustainability and also adaptation. California's prolonged drought, a year-long fire season that's been going on for some time now. And of course, you're right, America's a big country, but many of the citizens live along the coast, and that's true, of course, the world over. Most people live in cities. More and more that's going to be the case, and many of those cities are along the coasts. And so with the threat of sea level rise, and what we're already seeing in some communities in terms of flooding on a more routine basis, it's really gotten people's attention back at home. Just a word about how our center interacts with the cities and states. We were founded by some of the cities and states themselves to be a resource in Washington and to help to inform the federal dialogue with the lessons of the states primarily, and also to serve as a resource to the states on both mitigating climate change and adapting to climate change. And so on the mitigation front, we work with senior state officials on the transportation front, in energy agencies and environmental agencies to reduce emissions from the important sector of transportation. And we also work very much on the Clean Power Plan, as Alden mentioned, building on some of the successful state efforts. We have 10 states with cap and trade programs already. We've got 38 states with renewable portfolio standards. And we do convenings around these issues. We have tools that people can see what their clean energy economy looks like in those states and how they can tweak it and maybe do some kind of cap and trade program that brings in revenues. It's called the State Energy Analysis Tool. We also have a comprehensive tool on adaptation and climate change. We have over 1,500 resources that show what's happening on the ground with regard to changing practices with climate change in mind. There's a lot of demand for this information, and most recently we've partnered with the Federal Department of Transportation to really profile 100 different examples of where transportation and transit investment has been changed with the threat of climate change in mind. This is a very big topic. I'm on the executive committee of the National Transportation Research Board for the country, and this is a topic that we talk about at our executive meetings. We talk about at our international annual meeting that's attended by tens of thousands of people from around the country. And for the first time this year, in addition to having a focus at the annual meeting, we're actually having a meeting just on extreme events and climate impacts in the fall and September in the United States. And so, you know, that's the transportation community. We're talking about civil engineers and all. These are not necessarily the people that you think about on the bleeding edge of activism, but they're seeing that these effects are already happening, and they're really hungry for information about how to build or rebuild after a disaster differently in an era of climate change. So we're trying to be a resource to them, and of course many others are as well. We're tracking what the states are doing. Many of the states already have adaptation plans on the books, and as Alden mentioned, it's sort of a bipartisan basis. If you look at some of the states that have adaptation plans, Alaska had one back when Sarah Palin was governor. So not a name that you associate with climate change activism, but as governor saw these impacts in Alaska. Same thing with Florida when Governor Christ was governor. So many of these states are still taking action, even though they might have had some political changes, and we're tracking the progress to meeting those goals. A lot of cities are also taking action as well because they're seeing these on-the-ground impacts. Our center works with local jurisdictions and state governors to help them craft things like sea level rise ordinances and changes to their land use practices, and things at the governor level like executive orders that can actually help set the agencies that they deal with on the right path, sort of akin to what Alden said is happening at the federal level thanks to the executive order. And some of them have not had an easy go of it trying to make changes with climate change in mind, whether it be rebuilding differently after a disaster. Some of them have encountered barriers. For example, when we worked with the state of Vermont, an inland state that was devastated by Tropical Storm Irene, and they wanted to build their culverts larger to carry more water in an era of climate change, or to build their roads back or bridges back differently. They were at first encountering difficulty getting federal reimbursement, but that was brought to the administration's attention, and with the state, local, and tribal leaders task force, those policies and other policies preferences for gray infrastructure, concrete infrastructure as opposed to green infrastructure, preferences for hard seawalls as opposed to living shorelines that have multiple benefits. We and others identified those, and that was part of the President's task force report and recommendations that our center did with the help of local and state leaders, and tribal leaders too, because it's really going to take people working at all these different levels. Adaptation is a very place-based phenomenon. And as I mentioned, there's many roles that can be played by universities like ours and the state institutions. Public-private partnerships have been important, and indeed regional partnerships across agencies and across jurisdictions. In Southeast Florida, there's been a compact that's been very robust, even with changes in administrations coming and going, and even with different parties really working together to look at what the impacts are going to be to South Florida and how they can respond, trying to be on the same page about what the projections are going to look like. That's also happening in the West. With the Western Adaptation Alliance that we're working with on drought and other impacts on the western states, as well as some California regional collaboratives that are developing. As Alden mentioned, the administration is announcing some additional support for external collaborations, and we're hoping that there's also more support for internal collaborations in the U.S., but frankly, it's been a challenge because sometimes even giving support for adaptation at home is a difficult issue in Congress. When you say the word climate change, and you're adapting to that impact, sometimes these things get zeroed out of the budgets. So it is really a challenge, but I give the administration a lot of credit for using what authority and what funding they do have and really trying to orient the incentives in the right direction. The Coast Guard speech that the president made talks about the military impacts of climate change on readiness and on operations. We're looking forward to the Pope's visit and his encyclical this week and hoping that maybe that generates a little bit more political support from a broader base in the U.S. We're all watching for that. Of course, many of us are applauding the G7 and looking forward to the G20 discussions about this. One of the things that's been happening in the U.S. is divestment decisions, and even our university, Georgetown, thanks, I would say, to a student movement, is divesting from coal. That's a relatively new development. That's, of course, happening in European institutions as well. There's also national disaster resilience competition that is allowing some of the jurisdictions that have been affected by disasters to plan and envision together changes and to use the federal money from like HUD, the Housing and Urban Development money that comes to them, differently with climate change impacts in mind, with collaboration with the Rockefeller Foundation. So that's an interesting example of a public-private partnership between a philanthropy and the people on the ground, as well as using federal resources. And then finally, of course, we're looking forward to the Paris COP. And our center, because of our relationship with the states, will be bringing over governors, former governors, senior state officials to talk about both the impacts of climate change, but also to pivot, as they often do, to a message of hope, to a message of some of the changes that they're making on the ground that are investing in a clean energy economy and that are creating jobs and opportunities for their regions as well.